کنفرانس جهانی همزمان با اعلام حکم دادگاه. ارتباط زنده آنلاین با مجاهدین در اشرف 3، دادگاه آنتورپ، شخصیتهای بین المللی و شاکیان خصوصی و یاران شورشگر. 3000 نقطه در 40 کشور جهان. پنجشنبه 4 فوریه 2021 16 بهمن.
قسمت سوم، سخنرانیهای کامبریج اولین وزیر امنیت داخلی آمریکا، جان اسپلر نماینده مجلس انگلستان، ریاض یاسین سفیر یمن در فرانسه و ژان فرانسوا لوگاره عضو شورای منطقه ایل دو فرانس.
کامبریج اولین وزیر امنیت داخلی آمریکا. هدفی که رهبران رژیم و وزارت اطلاعات برای اسدی دیپلمات رژیم مشخص کرده بودند، بمبگذاری در گردهمایی مقاومت ایران بود. جهان باید بپرسد که چرا؟ در این صورت حقیقت آشکار خواهد شد. شورای ملی مقاومت ایران یک تهدید بلافاصل برای رژیم سرکوبگر ایران و بزرگترین و سازمان یافته ترین و محبوب ترین آلترناتیو دموکراتیک برای رژیم است.
کشورها و رهبرانشان باید خود را با آمال مردم ایران برای آزادی همراه کنند. آنها را فرا می‌خوانم که شورای ملی مقاومت ایران را به عنوان آلترناتیو رژیم موجود به طور علنی به رسمیت بشناسند. این منتهای محکوم کردن اقدامات رژیم است.
جان اسپلر نماینده مجلس عوام انگلستان. حکم امروز دادگاه نقطه عطفی در تلاش برای حسابرسی از رژیم ایران است. جنبش مقاومت در طول سالیان نقش مؤثری در افشای تروریسم رژیم و نهادهای مختلف آن ایفا کرده است.
ریاض یاسین سفیر یمن در فرانسه. به مریم رجوی و مردم ایران به خاطر این پیروزی تبریک میگویم. این یک روز تاریخی است. رفتار تروریستی عملکرد دائم این رژیم است.
ژان فرانسوا لوگاره عضو شورای منطقه ایل دو فرانس. حکم دادگاه بلژیک نشان داد تروریسم دولتی عملکرد رسمی رژیم ایران است. این سیاست باید به شدت محکوم شود و مورد پیگرد قرار گیرد.
بایستی عملکرد شجاعانه مردم ایران و رئیس جمهور مریم رجوی مورد حمایت قرار گیرد تا اصول دموکراتیک و عادلانه پیروز شوند.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you on what I consider to be a fairly historic day. And in thinking about the significance of this day, I was reminded of a passage from a Shakespearean play, which is often used by others in a variety of different forms. But Shakespeare wrote, "The truth will out." The world owes a debt of gratitude to the Belgian people, the Belgian State Security Service, and the Belgian judicial system. They did not turn away from seeking the truth. They accepted the responsibility to find the truth, to gather information behind a planned bombing of a public event in the outskirts of Paris in July of 2019, and to identify those responsible for even planning such a reprehensible act. The Iranian diplomat Asdallah worked with 3 accomplices in an effort to achieve the objective set by the leaders of Iran, particularly the Ministry of Intelligence and Security Affairs. The objective simply being the bombing of an event hosted by the National Council of Resistance in Iran The world should ask why, and then the truth will out. The NCRI is an immediate threat to the repressive Iranian regime. It is the largest, best organized, and most popular democratic alternative to the regime. And over the years, its leaders and its advocacy, and their advocacy for a peaceful, tolerant, democratic, non-nuclear Iran has attracted greater and greater internal support within the people of Iran and greater international support. And that was evidenced by the incredible number of political representatives from countries around the world attending that event, all of whom were potential targets of the Iranian conceived and supported terrorist plot. The regime's fear of a democratic alternative, attracting even greater and greater domestic and international support, was and still remains so intense, it directed one of its diplomats to oversee this plot, collaborate with the accomplices, act as a courier for the explosives, and coordinate the activity with the Iranian government. The truth will out. The planned bombing was a state-sponsored event. It is time for all freedom-loving nations to take notice, not only of this event, but the words of President Bush in his State of the Union address as far back as 2002, when he condemned the Iranian regime for its aggressive pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. He described the leadership of the regime as, and I quote, an unelected few seeking to repress the Iranian people's hopes for freedom. And the NCRI certainly reflects those hopes and has grown stronger and stronger every year. And for the past 20 years, the regime's effort to suppress the truth and eliminate any efforts to bring democracy and freedom to Iran has been brutally but unsuccessfully sustained. The regime has killed dissidents. It has not killed their quest for freedom. In light of the findings of the Belgian court, the world, particularly our allies, must also remind themselves that Iran has continued to subsidize terror in the Middle East, support regional proxies in Syria and Iraq, imprison or murder democratic dissidents, advance its ballistic missile technology, and accelerate its plutonium enrichment. The planned bombing was a state-sponsored operation by a terrorist state that continues to operate with arrogance, with impunity, with disdain for human rights and common decency, and the basic norms of a civil society. The European Union, the United States, nations around the world must applaud the courage and the diligence of the Belgian government, its judicial system and their citizens, and loudly, resoundingly condemn the action of the Iranian government. But rhetorical condemnation without further action will have a little impact on this rogue regime, who heretofore has totally been unwilling to change its behavior. Countries whose citizens were in harm's way in that July event should consider downgrading, seriously considering downgrading diplomatic relationships with Iran. The operation of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security Affairs, that whole shop, should be labeled a foreign terrorist organization. It's the best way to hold them accountable worldwide. And we need to hold the foreign minister accountable in some fashion. I'll let the diplomats figure that one out, for his use of the diplomatic pouch, the diplomatic corps, the embassies and the missions as hubs for their terrorist activity. And there's one final action that countries who have repudiated and condemned the Iranian government for not only this terrorist act, but its terror and repression over previous decades, that I think would be the most powerful and the most meaningful of all. These countries and their leaders should align themselves with the hopes of the Iranian people for freedom. I would call on them to recognize publicly the National Council for Resistance in Iran as the alternative to the existing regime. That is the ultimate condemnation of their action. In that fashion, the truth will out. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to share with you my thoughts on this very important day.
The court ruling today is a breakthrough for the efforts to hold the regime in Iran accountable for its terrorism. The resistance movement have performed an enormous amount over the years to expose the Iranian regime's terrorism and the different regime institutions and paramilitary forces involved in advancing these malign activities all around the world. We've long known about Iran's destabilizing activities in the region, but of course, much wider, and its financial, logistical, and military support for various terrorist groups, especially, but not exclusively, in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, and also now, of course, in North Africa. But now, with the sentence against the Iranian diplomats, we have clear evidence of direct Iranian state involvement in terrorism on European soil, which shows the regime in Iran is prepared to use terrorism in Europe to advance its policies and goals, but also to ignore very widespread, understood international rules. This threat requires a firm response by the whole of Europe. And as the European governments consider their options, there is one key issue they must take into consideration. And that is, faced with growing popular protests in the last 2 years in Iran, challenging the theocracy and demanding changes, the regime have decided to export its crackdown on dissent, not only at home, but also to Europe, and sought to silence opposition, not only on the streets of Tehran, but also on European soil. So, successfully to successfully counter Iran's activities, Europe should work with the organizations in Iran that are struggling against the dictatorship. Furthermore, the response by the UK and the EU as partners must result in a firm policy on Iran that recognizes the fact that Iran's embassies and diplomatic missions neither represent the will of the people of Iran, but are rather the tools the regime uses to advance and facilitate its state terrorism and to run terrorist and also criminal networks throughout Europe and indeed across the world. So, the British government, I'm urging them to work with our European partners, our EU partners, to confront the threat from Tehran, and today's welcome news should spur them to greater diplomatic activity and to take action both in our own territory, but also on the world diplomatic front in order to bring this regime to account and to restore this wonderful nation, this great culture and civilization with huge resources for the benefit of the people of Iran and not for the elite few around the regime. Thank you very much.
First, I would like to congratulate President Mariam Regawi and Iranian people for this victory. This is a historical day, and of course, this terrorism, which is the behavior, continuous behavior of the Iranian regime since long time, as they are supporting and funding the Houthis militia, which they call themselves Ansarullah in my country, where they destroyed my country in the last 6-year wars. And the actions are, all of them are terrorist acts, what they are doing to my people in Yemen. And the last decision by the American government to label them as a terrorist should be supported by everybody and should be supported by everyone, because what they are doing in my country is no different what the Iranian regime doing in Iran and outside Iran. They are working, the Houthis militia or Ansarullah, they are an agents for a terrorist regime, which I think we should all come together and work together in order to stop them and to stop their unwanted terrorism, which of course a lot of innocent people are dying and suffering from this kind of behaviors. Today we are celebrating, and we would continue our struggle, our fight against terrorism. And I think the decision today by the court, the verdict, is worth to celebrate and to remember this day. And thank you very much for all your support. And we hope that coming together, we can become victorious always against such behaviors. Thank you very much.
Je suis particulièrement heureux d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui en tant que partie civile contre les auteurs de l'attentat de juin 2018, dont j'aurais pu être victime, comme des milliers d'autres personnes. Et ce verdict, ce jugement qui vient de tomber est particulièrement révélateur. Il montre bien que le terrorisme d'État, qui est l'action officielle du gouvernement iranien, doit être condamné et poursuivi très sévèrement, parce que c'est une autre face finalement de la politique de répression qui est tous les jours en action sur le territoire iranien. On le voit bien avec l'exécution du champion Navid Afkari, on le voit bien à travers toutes les actions au quotidien de menaces et de pression. La réponse des pays, il ne s'agit pas seulement de la France qui a été visée par cet attentat, il ne s'agit pas seulement de la Belgique qui a agi efficacement pour pourchasser et punir ce terroriste, ce diplomate terroriste. Il faut subordonner la poursuite des relations diplomatiques avec l'Iran à l'arrêt total et définitif des actions et des menaces terroristes. Il faut adresser un avertissement solennel au régime de Téhéran quant à l'utilisation du statut diplomatique pour des menaces et des actions terroristes. Il faut que, conformément à la déclaration de l'Europe du 29 avril 1997, on subordonne le statut des diplomates iraniens au respect de ces contraintes qui sont absolument indispensables et que les diplomates qui ne la respecteraient pas soient expulsés. Il faut aussi que les institutions prétendument religieuses ou culturelles, qui sont en réalité des lieux de diffusion de ces menaces et de ces actions terroristes, soient fermées. Il faut soutenir l'action courageuse et déterminée de l'ONPI et de sa présidente Mariam Rajavi pour que ces principes démocratiques, juridique juste puisse enfin triompher.